The second part then is the main introduction to direct transcendence. Although there are many ways to present this, here are 7 sets of 5-fold introductions. And I've never seen this presented in this way anyplace else. I've seen some things kind of like parts of it, but nothing as systematic as this. And so the first one is Introduction to the 5 Enlightened Bodies. Now, we're already familiar with the 5 enlightened bodies, the 5 Buddha families here. Through those key points, you will see the Vajra chains of awareness and the self-radiance of primordial wisdom. Since these appearances of light and bindus appear as the natural essence of luminosity, these are the enlightened body of Virachana, illuminator. Since luminosity is unchanging, it is the enlightened body of Akshobhya Vajra, unshakable indestructibility. Since that grows and increases, it is the enlightened body of Ratnasambhava, source of jewels. Since these visions are immeasurable, they are the enlightened body of Amitabha, limitless light. Since the 5 lights appear spontaneously, they are the enlightened body of Amoghasiddhi, meaningful accomplishment. These are the ground. The path is meditating on the luminosity of emptiness of these appearances without any dualistic grasping or fixation. The fruition arises at the time that individual enlightened bodies of the 5 families appear. Now that usually happens. We're talking here about the 3rd preliminary, but those appearances in terms of the visions usually happen beginning stages of them in the 2nd vision and the more elaborate versions of them in the 3rd vision. So those, in some ways, the fruition part appears to be referring to later in the process than what we would typically describe as preliminary. Continuing on page 43, the second one, we have an introduction to the 5 primordial wisdoms, which we've also experienced before. So luminosity is immaculate and acts as the ground for the enlightened bodies to appear. There is mirror-like primordial wisdom. Since those appearances are inseparable, there is the primordial wisdom of equality or equanimity. Since the various aspects of mind individually appear, there is discriminating primordial wisdom. Since these appearances are spontaneously present without seeking them, there is accomplishing or all-accomplishing primordial wisdom. Since these are primordially empty and free from any root, there is the primordial wisdom of the expanse of reality, or Dharmadhatu. These are the ground. Meditating upon that clearly and lucidly is the path. After perfecting that, the fruition is all appearances and possibilities of the universe arising as the visions of light. In other words, all appearances appear to us in the form of light, which is something that usually happens with the 4th vision. The 3rd section here then is Introduction to the 5 Buddha families. So we looked at the Tathagatas related to each of the 5 families previously, so now we have the families per se. Since all the Tathagatas dwell in the manner of appearances of luminosity, there is the Tathagata family, the Buddha family. Since they do not change from being luminosity, there is the Vajra family. Since that is the source of all enlightened qualities, there is the Ratna family. Since it does not wear any faults, there is the Lotus family. Since the rainbow body without remainder can be accomplished through it, there is the Karma family. These are the ground. The path is meditating in that state openly and vividly. And having perfected that, there is the fruition of not returning to samsara. The 4th one is the introduction to the 5 colors of light. The first here, since that luminosity is immaculate, there is the color white. Since all enlightened qualities are perfected, there is the color yellow. Since it appears without needing to find it, there is the color red. Since the energy of activities is perfected, there is the color green. Since there is unchanging stability, there is the color yellow. These are the ground. Meditating upon that is the path. Perfecting that is the fruition. Now, usually in the 5 colors, one of those would have been blue. And I tried to look at the Tibetan script to identify exactly what colors were being referred to, and I could not find one that specifically said blue. But in Tibetan script, there are lots of variations of blue that are described in ways that don't include the word blue. And so it may be a reference to that, but it is unusual to have 2 yellows and no blue in the way that that is described in there. But I tried to find an answer for that, but I was not able to get one for you as a part of this. The 5th then is Introduction to the 5 Subtle Winds. Since that luminosity is never separate from the heat of primordial wisdom, there is the fire equalizing subtle wind. Since it is the life force of samsara and nirvana, there is the life-sustaining subtle wind. Since samsara and nirvana are separated through training in that, there is the purity and impurity separating subtle wind. Since everything is pure and impure, is pervaded by the 5 lights and primordial wisdoms, there is the pervading subtle wind. Since one is carried to the ground of nirvana after the life force of samsara is severed, there is the merciless apocalyptic karmic subtle wind. These are the ground. Meditating upon that is the path. Perfecting that is the fruition. Now these winds are somewhat different than the winds when we look at Tsa Lung and the practices there. There are also subtle winds there, but the lists do not match up. So these are a different way of understanding those subtle winds, if you will. Number 6, Introduction to the 5 Types of Wisdom. These are types of wisdom. These are not the primordial wisdoms, which we've already looked at the top of the page here. Since samsara and nirvana are separated through whether one realizes or does not realize luminosity, there is the wisdom of separation. Since primordial wisdom is gathered, there is the wisdom of gathering. Since all is pervaded, there is pervading wisdom. Since the visions of light come and go, there is the wisdom of movement. Since it liberates from samsara, there is the wisdom of liberation. These are the ground. Meditating upon that is the path. Perfecting that is the fruition. And then continuing on 45, we have the 7th and last of this collection, Introduction to the 5 Dakinis. Blue light is the Buddha Dakini. White light is the Vajra Dakini. Yellow light is the Ratna Dakini. Red light is the Lotus Dakini. Green light is the Karma Dakini. These are the ground. Meditating upon that is the path. Perfecting that is the fruition. Now, in this case, the blue light actually does use the word blue in the Tibetan script, so I was able to match that, but it couldn't get it to match up with that other section that we looked at. Then, the 3rd part is the conclusion of the ways to practice through the 4 yogas. There are 4 continuous yogas of the view, meditation, conduct, and the fruition. So the first one is the yoga of the view. The essence of luminosity is empty. Its nature is luminous. Its compassionate energy appears unceasingly. That is the view of evenly resting in meditation. After that, realizing that all various appearances and possibilities that appear have no intrinsic nature and are like the reflection in a mirror is the view of post-meditation. Thus, at all times, never separate from that state. The state generally would be emptiness. So we stay in that state at all times. Even when carrying out our daily activities and so forth, we remain connected to that. Now, that may mean you just happen to think that, oh, this lacks inherent existence. Or if you just happen to recognize the Dharmakaya nature of something, or what's going on, or the way you're experiencing things. So there's a variety of different ways that we can view and understand this, but we remember over and over again. Or even if we think about compassion, anything that's Dharma related that we think about as we go throughout our day, different activities and so forth that are not part of our formal practice of sitting on the cushion, is fine. It's helping to bring that into everything that we do. So we are slowly becoming a Buddha in the process of doing that. The more we act like we are a Buddha, the more we become an actual Buddha. So the second yoga is that of meditation. Meditate within that state upon luminosity and emptiness, free from all elaborations. So luminosity and emptiness is our own Buddha nature. So we meditate on that, free from all elaborations. And it doesn't mean that we analyze it, that we think about it the way we would with Vipassana, but we recognize it and we just abide in that. The third one is the yoga of action. At such time, destroy all fixated focus and grasping at a purpose. Like a crazy person, act without accepting or rejecting hope and fear. So no attachment, no aversion, no good, no bad. But at the same time, I always point out the statement of Padmasambhava. My view is vast as the space, but my behavior is as fine as barley flour. So yes, on one hand, we're not restricted in any way in terms of our actions, our behavior, and so forth. But on the other hand, we need to take into consideration the context in which we live and how we address those kinds of issues. The fourth one is the yoga of fruition. Through mastery of the trainings within the way that the luminosity of appearance and emptiness arises, there is no affirmation or denial, hope or fear. Those are just concepts. When we get to this point where we're in kind of a transcendent wisdom state, then these just become labels. Instead of just seeing it as it is, those labels tend to come up. So what we're saying here is we let go of the labels and just see it as it is. And then you pass into the self-arisen, self-liberated fruition. The reasons for doing such introductions are twofold. Temporarily, you will directly see the reality behind every conceptual fabrication without exception. That's just what I was talking about there. You see directly the reality behind every conceptual fabrication without exception. So you recognize what that is, and you don't get caught up in the elaboration and conceptualization of those things. Then ultimately, through the key points of direct seeing, you will not be tainted by virtue and non-virtue. So good or bad, you're not concerned about good or bad. You've kind of transcended that in a way, but the way I like to talk about it is that because those kinds of behaviors have become habitual, you don't have to think about it anymore. You just behave in a virtuous manner, even though we don't have to intentionally in any way do that any longer. Even if you experience an untimely death, you will be born in the Nirmanakaya pure realms. So that concludes this part of the text.